Writing CSS can be hard enough, and then having to worry about what browsers actually support, partially support, or just not support at all can be really infuriating. In this video, we're going to be looking at the surprising difference that you might not even know about between the different browsers, even the modern ones. How you can actually check for what is supported, not supported, partially supported, and a whole bunch of stuff with that. And then we're going to finish it all up by how we can actually deal with unsupported features, what we're supposed to do, and how you can sort of get around it. Hi, my name is Kevin, and here on my channel we learn how to make the web and how to make it look good while we're at it with weekly tips, tricks, and tutorials. And most of my videos focus around writing code and doing fun stuff with code, and we are going to be looking at some code in this video, but it's going to be more of a conversation about cross-browser compatibility more than anything else. But before you run away, I think there's a few really interesting things that can be brought up here. And the main reason I'm bringing it up in the first place is because in my videos I like looking at things like CSS variables, or I had my all reset or all onset video that I did where a lot of people commented saying, well, I can't use that. It's not supported by Internet Explorer, and I only write code that's supported by all browsers. And while that's a fair point, it's one I strongly disagree with. Because browser support is complicated a little bit, and it's a bit of a hot topic as obvious by the comments and the discussions going on some of my videos, I didn't want to be this to be just my point of view. So I collaborated with a frequent commenter here on my channel, as well as just a CSS wizard in his own right, Facundo Corandini, who he has an article over on CSS tricks that I'm going to link to down below, where he does some amazing stuff with some CSS custom properties for background color changing to match your text color. Maybe it's the text color to match high contrast with your background color. Anyway, really awesome all CSS, just CSS with the custom properties, really cool stuff. So go check that out. But yeah, I asked him to help me out with this because I didn't want it to just be my point of view. I wanted to make sure it was a balanced point of view that other people agreed with, pretty much, and not just spouting my own beliefs. Now, the point of this video is not to solve cross-browser compatibility, but to present a modern view of it. So before we really get into the nitty-gritty of all this, I just want to make sure you know that not all browsers are created equal, and I'm not even talking about Internet Explorer here. This is where the user agent styles come in. All browsers have a user agent style. That's, and if you create a new document, you don't do anything, you just have HTML, you have like an 8-pixel margin all the way around, that's the user agent style. All the default font sizes, that's the user agent style. And for the most part, they're the same. But there is a few differences, and they're all supposed to use the spec to decide what they are, but they don't all do that. So for example, here I have a little really simple CodePen opened. It is linked down in the description below if you want to check it out. And I'm looking just at the strong tag here. So the strong tag in Chrome, Safari, and Edge will all default to bold, but in Firefox and actually Internet Explorer, it defaults to bolder. So you can see here the difference between the two of them, and they're not the same. This is the exact same code on both of them. And we can see here in the strong, the font weight was 300, but I have the bold. So the user agent style sheet is defaulting that to bold, whereas over here in Firefox, it's actually defaulting to bolder. And the reason the bolder is less bold is I'm bringing in all the different font weights here. So it's going from 300, it's jumping up only to 400 instead of this one, which looks like it's getting all the way up to the 700, which I'm pretty sure is the default bold. So one of them is going only to 400, the other one's getting all the way up to 700. So there's a big difference between the two of them. And just to show you that even Microsoft can't stay consistent, here's Internet Explorer where it's staying at, it looks like it's at the bolder, and this is in Edge where it's becoming a bold. Or have you ever done a text align center on a UL and looked at the difference between the browsers? Here is Chrome and Firefox. And notice there's a big difference on the placement of those bullets and even the size of the bullets. Interesting, right? Side note, never do this. From a typography standpoint, this is a nightmare, whichever one you want to look at. So just if you do have to have a center aligned list for whatever reason, use the list style none instead of trying to worry about a way to make them consistent. But just to show there are differences between the browsers that maybe you're not even aware of. and you're worried about some of the bigger picture stuff, but some of the base level things are just hanging around and causing some issues too. Now, this is why people like tools like Normalize so much, because it helps to normalize everything and make them all behave in the same way. Just so you know, it does make everything bolder and not bold. Eric Myers made the reset.css, and that was sort of revolutionary at the time, where he was resetting a whole bunch of stuff just to reset it all. It's all bringing it down to no styles on anything, no font sizes on anything. Everything's just, the list styles are gone. Everything's been scraped down. And it was cool because it made sure all the browsers are being scraped down to the same place. And it got rid of some of the annoying things that were there. First of all, it was really heavy-handed, and it doesn't touch on everything. It's not touching on all the user agent styles. So because of those two things, tools like Normalize have become a lot more popular. Even there's variations of Normalize now, such as Bootstrap, who has their own. Those became popular because instead of just trying to strip all the styling away, they said, let's leave the styling, let's make them just all style the same way. So Normalize touches on more things than Eric's reset does, but it doesn't strip things away. It just normalizes them across all browsers, and it also takes care of a few bugs along the way, which is really, really handy. And once you've normalized everything, it's time to start writing your own CSS, and this is where you might run into having some features that you're not sure if they're supported or not. You want to write some nice modern CSS, you watch one of my videos, you read a cool article somewhere, and you want to do some fun stuff, and you're just not sure if something is supported, and you want to know, how can I check if it's supported, where it's supported, and all of that. So the first site is CanIUsecom, which is my go-to. This is fast, quick, just bang in there. You can get some really quick breakdowns on use. It's visual, it's super easy to use, super user-friendly. You know what browsers are using it, and you even know what percentage of the population is using each browser, which is just super handy. So here on CanIUse.com, again, the link will be in the description below, we can check out Can I Use stuff. So let's say we want to look at if we can use background blend modes. So you write in what you want to look for, it gives you this. And one thing this is really nice with is it's just super visual. You can really quickly see what is supported and what's not supported, and by which versions of the browser, as well as the percentage of people using those browsers. So if I hover over IE here, you can see it's 2.57% of people are currently using that browser globally. I can see that despite a number of browsers not supporting it, it is supported by 87% of browsers. I can also get a little more specific. I'm in Canada, so I can import my usage for that country if I want to. And also, if you come up to here where it says settings, you can actually do your own geography. You can also import from Google Analytics. So if you have your own users, you can pull your own users into here, which is really, really awesome and a cool thing that you can do if you want to bring it down exactly to your audience, which is really neat. So right now it's on current aligned, but you can go through and change that to usage relative. So it gives you a bit more of a visual of, instead of just showing the current browsers people are using, it visually shows you how many, which browsers are the most commonly used ones. Date relative as well, which is a little less important. Some really cool things down here is you can see the partial support, so you can see when there's issues and what those issues are. Chrome 46 has serious bugs. Safari only has partial support because it doesn't support everything. And I didn't even realize that. I didn't know that Safari finally got support for it. So it's really awesome that Safari now has full support for it, which is really, really awesome. You can also go to see known issues. So there apparently are some reports there. You can go to resources, get some demos, get the specification, and some other stuff. And you can also leave a feedback right here. I'm on another page here just to show really quickly. You can also sometimes get these links that go to the feature suggestion page for a certain thing that you're trying to, if you think it should be. So if you think this should be in Edge, you can click over there and suggest it as something that should be added. And that is a good way to actually get things added to browsers, is by actually suggesting them as a feature. There's a lot of features in browsers. There's limited team sizes, so telling them what's important to you gives them an idea of what's the next step that they should be implementing. So it can be really, really handy to do that sometimes if there's things that it drives you nuts because that one browser is not supporting it. Filing feature suggestions can make a difference. And whereas CanIUse is a nice quick reference, opening up the MDN, which I have right here, this is like opening up the Encyclopedia. So background blend modes. So I find the page for that, and you can see, just to go back 1 second, we're not just dealing with HTML and JavaScript. We're dealing with lots of different stuff here if it's needed. So the MDM is the Mozilla Developer Network, just in case I didn't mention that. So one cool thing here is you actually get examples of how things work right in the page itself. You get the syntax, all the different things about it, examples of how it works that you can open up in CodePen, where it is in everything, and of course a nice little browser compatibility chart. One thing you'll notice here though is it says no, and it's behind a flag. So sometimes the stuff here and here, so this is interesting, whereas here it just says it's not supported, whereas over here it's letting us know that it is in an early prototype, and so users aren't going to actually see it, but you can sometimes get more information from the MDN than you can from CanIUse. And this also supports things like values. So whereas there are some values here, it's mostly properties that I've noticed. Whereas if you're looking for certain things in here, if I look up something like grid gap, and just for fun, I can actually get specific values, and I can see down, if we go all the way down, all the stuff on that, but I'm getting the browser compatibility. Here's for the grid layout, and here is, flex layout. It's at that stage, and the grid layout, it's much more advanced and much better supported. Just in general that you'll get a lot more information when you're on the MDN than you will from CanIUse, but they're both awesome resources. This is the quick check. This is the Encyclopedia. Now, as we saw with CanIUse, it gives us sort of a global population breakdown of who uses what browser, and that's a really nice starting place. And you can even break down by country and stuff like that, which is cool, because if your target market is in your own country, you can break it down that way. But that's not enough. You need to know your audience as well. So just having analytics on your site, or if it's for a client, having, I'm assuming they're gathering analytics on who their audience is. And this is really, really important to know who your audience is, because that's changing the browsers they're using. For example, let's take a look at my website. Globally, there's 2.6% of the population using IE11, but on my own site, it's only 1.1%. And that's sort of to be expected, because my site's not, it's probably devs and other stuff. And because of that also, there's 14% of people that are on Firefox, which is way above the normal, like massive above the normal. So it's important to know, just like if you're doing a website for a client who's running a bingo hall, their audience is probably a little bit older, so expect people that aren't tech savvy, that are older, that are using their system defaults, so probably a lot higher on Internet Explorer and Edge and Safari, and a lot lower on all the other ones. Your audience also might be in educational establishments like schools and stuff like that, or just big corporations. Those guys are locked down. I work at a school. I have Firefox, I have Chrome, I have Safari there because we're on Macs. But they're old versions because our computers are locked. We can't update them ourselves. So I'm way behind on some stuff, and it's a bit frustrating because sometimes I want to try something and I can't because that feature's not supported, even though it's supported everywhere. But where I'm at when I'm at work, it isn't at all. And the same thing happens for corporations and companies where they lock down their computers. Sometimes they're stuck on an Internet Explorer 10 because that's all they have. That leads into the next things of what you can do for people that the support isn't there for. So the first thing I'm going to say is if you're using something that not all the browsers support, does it even matter? Yes, Kevin, it really matters. Yeah, I guess it matters, but does it? It sounds like a weird question, but honestly, let's look at my own audience again. 1.1% of users are on Internet Explorer. Does it matter if they're not getting the full experience? It matters if the site doesn't work. Now, it has to work because these people that are on Internet Explorer either don't have a choice or they don't know how to upgrade because they're not tech savvy, whatever it is. So the site needs to work because If it doesn't work, it's probably not their fault that they're on Internet Explorer. So the site needs to work. But why does it need to be the same experience, whether in Chrome, Firefox, Edge, Internet Explorer? If I visit a website on my phone, it's going to be a different experience than if I'm on my computer or if I'm on my tablet. So if I'm one user and I'm getting a different experience across the same website just because I'm changing devices, why is it not okay for two completely different people to have slightly different experiences because they're in a different browser? Think about that for a second. I get 3 different experiences and I'm one user. 2 different people getting different experiences, but they don't even realize it. Whereas for me, I know because it's the same person. But that's cool. But these two, they need to have the exact same experience? Why? Let's just go look at that button example that seemed to get most people frustrated and what it sort of inspired this video from the beginning. I have my nice little button here. I have a little hover effect. It's not the exact same button I used on the previous example, but I have this button here, and it's where I use the all on set at the top here, and people were saying they can't use it because, they can't, because this isn't supported everywhere. But let's turn that off and see what would happen if someone was on Internet Explorer. And, well, look at that. The button still looks like a button. Does it look the same? No, it's a little less pretty because in Internet Explorer they get this border on it, but it's still clearly a button and it still clearly works. And I know I could add 1 line of CSS here to take off the border and make it more consistent, but that's sort of missing the point though. People who are commenting on that seem to assume that the all unset would stop it from working. It wouldn't be styled, the button wouldn't be there. It's still there, it still works. It looks a little bit different, but it's not broken. I'm not ruining or destroying my site because I did that 1 line of CSS a little bit differently. And this is where the whole idea of progressive enhancement comes in. This is where your first job is to make sure the site works. The site is working, it's functional. Anybody could visit it, whether they're on a cell phone or a computer, it doesn't matter, but the site is functional. And then you go back through and you build it up to use all of the cool stuff. You're enhancing the site with newer features and newer stuff. Now, I wouldn't actually build the whole site and then go back in to add the stuff in, but it's just as you're using some of these newer features, just be aware of what would happen if that didn't work. If somebody visits my site, I used grid for my site, so the layout is functioning with grid. It's all laid out with grid. But if they get there and they're using an old browser that doesn't support grid, they're pretty much going to get the mobile experience, but on a big screen. Is it ideal? No. But is it functional? Yes. Can they read the content? Yes. The colors aren't even going to be the same because I use custom properties with no fallback, so everything's just a standard color. The layout's going to be a little bit different. I think even the font sizes are going to be different. But they can still read the content. They can still access everything they need to. Everything is still functional. The only issue with it is it doesn't quite look the same as if you were on a more modern browser, where it looks prettier. That's the big difference there. Now, on the other end of the spectrum, there's a rise of sites that are saying this site only works on Chrome, and if you're on any other browser, it literally won't let it load. And this reminds me of the old days of the internet, where you had to, this site is optimized for Netflix, optimized for Netscape Explorer, or Netscape, was it just Netscape? It was optimized for Netscape, and you should download Netscape. It would tell you because you're on the wrong browser, and sometimes you'd block it. And that's sort of happening more and more these days, where you have to be on Chrome. If this is for an experimental site that's just pushing the limits because Chrome can do something nothing else can, that's fine. That's cool. Have fun and experiment. That's really awesome. But if it's for an actual production site, that's terrible. You're alienating a large or even a small amount of people just because they can't upgrade or change their browser. It's again, these people are people that can't update. They don't know how to update. If it's an elderly person, they might not even know what the word browser means. You're telling them to update their browser or change their browser, or it's some guy who's on his computer, it's his work laptop, it's the only thing he has. He doesn't want to be on Internet Explorer, and you're telling him he has to be on Internet Explorer? That's not cool. You're just sort of rubbing it in at that point. So we can't force these people to upgrade. The site needs to work, but it doesn't mean we can't use modern CSS either. Now I can probably do more for Internet Explorer, but I chose to prioritize, I looked at it, I said it's 1% of my audience. Yes, I want them to be able to read my content, but I'm going to put my efforts into this one aspect of making it grid and using custom properties and pushing the limits a little bit without sacrificing my site for Internet Explorer. So I wanted to push everything, do everything I could, and just make sure for Internet Explorer it was functional, and that's it. They got a functioning experience, they could read my content, and that, I think, is enough. Another thing that's really important here is for me to do this, I didn't write double the amount of CSS. Some people in the comments were saying, well, if I start talking about this type of stuff in the comments when I'm replying to them talking about browser compatibility, and they're like, I'd have to write double the amount of CSS. I'm not writing double the amount of CSS. Why would you write double the amount of CSS? I wouldn't do that either. That's crazy. Because it is. If you had to write double the amount of CSS, I would never advocate for any of this. That's not feasible. When you're doing this, you're progressively enhancing things. You're writing a whole bunch of CSS, and then there's a couple of lines that might not be supported. Even if it's grid, grid's not that many lines of CSS. My mobile layout's already functional. I have a max width on it, and then I have some extra lines for grid. So maybe the max width I didn't need, so I added one line of CSS to make sure things worked at big screens and didn't just stretch across. I didn't have to do a lot of work to make it work on Internet Explorer. If I wanted to be identical, it'd be a little bit more work, but I'm not doubling the amount of CSS I'm writing, and I would never advocate for that. But one thing you can do to add, when you do want to add features, that I would recommend is feature queries. Yes, it involves writing a bit more CSS. And it depends. It really depends on where you're going to be using it. But it's when you want to add features. You have your basic styles, and then a feature query will, oh, this is supported. Let's do some other cool stuff here. Let's go check an example of it just to see what I'm actually meaning here. I'm not going to go in-depth on feature queries. I'll probably have a more in-depth article on them and how they work. Or not article, video. But here, let's just go look at a quick example. So here, to take a look at how the feature query works, what I have done is I've actually come and done one here. And if we go and turn that whole thing off, I'm going to cut it and just take the whole thing out to show you what I had. So this is my normal code that I would have written to give myself something like that, not too fancy. And I know my end result's not super pretty or anything like that. But then inside of an @supports block, what I can do is, if it supports background blend mode saturation, which is exactly what I'm using here, then I'm going to bring a background image on it, and I'll bring my blend mode on it and my background size. So in reality, the only thing I'm doing is one extra line of CSS for this, because all the other stuff would have been there anyway. And the reason I'm actually using the @supports here is because, say the browser doesn't support it, and I still have my background image there, I'm sort of breaking my layout at this point. This text gets really hard to read on the yellow and on the white of the clouds and the sunset here. So having this not work could literally break the experience for a user. It could make the text unreadable. It causes problems. So sometimes you might not have to worry even about putting it yourself with a feature query like this, because everything's going to work fine if something fails. But in this case, if it fails, it's causing a problem. So if it's causing a problem, then I want this whole thing not to work. So I just get a blue background. And if it does support it, then I bring in this whole block. And the one really cool thing with feature queries is, if a feature query itself, the whole idea of @supports, if the browser doesn't know what that is, looking at you, Internet Explorer, it just ignores that whole block of code anyway. So it solves a bit of a problem with that. Now there's other tools too. There's PostCSS, where if you don't know about PostCSS, it uses JavaScript to add in after the fact. So you write all your CSS, it reads through your after the fact, goes through your CSS file, and actually adds in some stuff in there. And there's some really cool stuff you can do with it. So before we get to PostCSS, another thing I just want to mention quickly is, if it's just one thing you're really looking to check out, you can always look to see if there's a polyfill available. So polyfills are JavaScript backups that will, if the browser doesn't support something, make it work in that browser. So just as a quick example, I'm going to be looking at conic gradients in my 5-Minute Friday this week. So here's my code pen on it, and you can see that they're all working and everything. And amazingly enough, here in Internet Explorer, it's also working, and there's no support for it. I'm using Leah Veru's really awesome polyfill for it, which is right here, and I'll also link directly to this. And this has actually been implemented and is part of PostCSS now, so there is a PostCSS plugin that uses her polyfill. And the cool thing with PostCSS is you can, first of all, it has auto prefixer, which is an amazingly powerful tool. If you're not using auto prefixer, I'd strongly encourage it, especially if you're using grid for your layouts. They've recently put in a pretty big update, so if you have Internet Explorer or you're worrying about Internet Explorer, the auto prefixer will help you out there. And there's also right here the PostCSS thing. So I'm actually going to click on through to this one and check out the features. And this part of PostCSS is, as it says here, use tomorrow's CSS today. So if I go and look at the features here, instead of, they're sort of just like this massive group of polyfills is one way you could think about it. So the all property, which some people said we shouldn't be using on my all on set video, because of browser support, we can bring browser support in custom properties. If you want to start using those, you can bring in the plugin for that. And there's a whole bunch of other stuff to focus within. I mean, gap property, a whole bunch of really cool things that you might want to use that doesn't have full support in older browsers. This makes it work. It does use some JavaScript, so it will do it after the fact, after you've written your CSS. It is a post processor, hence PostCSS, and it will go through and add in the necessary CSS using JavaScript. It might add some extra classes and stuff into your file, but it's going to make all of the things work the way you're sort of expecting them to, even in browsers that don't actually have support. So, you know, there's a lot of different levels here that you can take from having graceful fallbacks and going all the way up to using tools like this to make sure it's going to work exactly how you want it to work in pretty much any browser that is actually used today. So to wrap everything up, you might completely disagree with me on this, or it's possible your team members or your boss completely disagree with me on this, and in that case it's a completely different story. That's, you know, something else entirely. But for the most part, I don't see why you can't be using modern CSS, things like custom properties and things like grid in production sites today. There's a whole bunch of ways to make sure that things are working out of the box. You can either do progressive enhancement, where you're not worried about these extra tools, you're just making sure the site's functioning at all levels and you're putting more focus on certain browsers, or you can use tools like PostCSS and auto prefixer and other stuff to make sure your site actually looks pretty much identical no matter what browser they're on, even though you're using modern CSS. Now, it's obviously up to you how much work and time you want to put into trying to get the new features involved in a project and have it work across browsers. And I'm very aware that time, money, and other constraints are there that can stop you from sometimes implementing some newer features in a project. And I also know that time, there's only so much time. We can't always learn about the newer features or how to properly implement them as well. But the one thing I ask is, when you run across one of my own videos or an article on CSS tricks or some other blog or just talking with somebody and it's using some newer feature that's really cool, don't stop and say, but we can't use that because it's not supported by Internet Explorer. Now, all this isn't about to disappear once Internet Explorer disappears either. We're all holding our breath waiting for Internet Explorer just to not be a thing anymore. It is a thing for now. Eventually it won't be. I'm looking forward to when it's not, but there's always going to be inconsistencies between our browsers, and there's other things that we do have to be worrying about too, things like connection speeds and just device performance and stuff like that. Not all devices are created equal. We have different sizes of screens. We also have different levels of the device. You have the high-end, the low-end devices, and we need to be taking that into account as well. So as much as it seems like to be a giant pain in the ass, and it is a pain in the ass a little bit, but we do live in a world that has multiple browsers, lots of different browsers, and we do have to live with it. And if anything, the world is a better place for it. By having different browsers, it creates competition, and they're pushing each other for better performance and better security, as well as just adding in all of these new features that they keep pushing the game and moving things forward. So yes, it is really important that we're aware of what Internet Explorer can and can't do, as well as all the other browsers. But it doesn't mean we have to be limited by that. And with all that said, I want to know what you think about it. I've just talked for a really long time. I think I got everything I wanted to say off my chest, but Am I full of it? Do you agree with what I'm saying? Have I made you start thinking about things a little bit differently? I'd really love to know, so please leave a comment down below to let me know what you think on this subject as a whole, if I missed anything, just anything you can think of whatsoever. I'd love to hear what your opinions are. And just a huge thank you for watching this all the way to the end. It was a long discussion a little bit there, so thank you so much for watching. Of course, also thank you so much for watching this whole thing. I really appreciate it. A massive thank you to my patrons for helping support everything I do here at my channel. And of course, until next time, don't forget to make your corner of the internet just a little bit more awesome, even if the people using Internet Explorer can't appreciate it.